Good afternoon, everybody. How we doing? This is the very first episode of Steelers Draft Talk. I'm your host, Derek Bell. With me is my good buddy, Nick Martin. You can find us wherever you get your podcast stuff or over on youtube.com/all Steelers. Nick, how we doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, man. I'm excited to talk some draft prospects and talk some ball, man.
Yeah, super excited, man. Honestly, Nick and I both are overjoyed about the opportunity to start this podcast. Um, Definitely something I've wanted to do for a really long time. For those of you that follow me on Twitter or have listened to me talk, on Fridays with Noah, you guys know how passionate I am about the NFL draft. And there's not too many more people that are into this stuff as much as I am. And, Nick's one of them. So that's really awesome for me to get to, chop it up, talk some draft stuff, really year round. Kind of pass the time. So excited about that. Excited to get going. Hope you guys really enjoy the content. So, Nick, to get started, man, wanted to talk about some guys that caught your attention last week during the college football slate. Who was somebody that it really impressed you last week?
I was honestly pretty impressed with Anthony Richardson. Richardson's had a really uneven season, showing like his best performance, like the performance that got everyone's attention at Utah, and then he follows up like a performance like that, and then has the game against Kentucky, and the things with his the things I was liking with him at his game at Texas A&M was his tendency to step into the pocket, climb up, and find the extra guy with pressure around him. And I thought that ability to throw off platform within the pocket was just really stood out. And of course, ridiculous athlete. And I think watching Justin Fields this past week as well, just seeing them being just seeing him being able to make plays with his legs the way he does, I think that's going to entice a lot of people with Anthony Richardson. It's unknown whether he will declare this year or not. There's a rumor going around from Tony Pauline that he's from Pro Football Network saying that he's heard from the people within the Florida Brass saying that he's going to go into this year's draft. But I
Interesting.
can't say whether or not it's the right or wrong decision. I think if the NFL likes him enough, I think that there's going to be a lot of reasons to take him high. Warts and all, he's still very young. He has inexperience, and it shows up. His mechanics sometimes don't are get a little funky. I think he has a clean release overall, but I do think when he is in the pocket, there are tendencies for his base to get kind of narrow as he steps in because he's when he keeps his feet under him as he climbs, he's very he'll click his heels occasionally, and that causes him to lose quite a bit of power on some of his throws. There was instances against Kentucky where you could see the ball kind of like float, and I was like, yeah, like those are the types of things that you want to work on. But that's much easier to fix than something like locking out your front leg and not getting that hip rotation through. Like there's a lot of guys that they developed those bad habits and they just was really hard to break. But overall, I see a lot of encouraging things from Anthony Richardson.
Yeah. I mean, Richardson was a guy I felt like everybody was really excited about seeing. We didn't really get to see much of him last year. What we did see was, pretty encouraging. But like you mentioned, just the combination of, arm talent and, athletic ability, is enough to pique the interest of pretty much everybody. Um, I'm not sure in my eyes, I hadn't seen that report from Pro Football Network. And I don't doubt that could be end up being the case, especially if he strings together some strong performances down the stretch. Richardson's a guy for me that I'm looking for 2024. I mean, next year's quarterback class, if you throw Richardson in there and you get a jump from him, I think could be quite good. But again, all it takes if Richardson's still getting feedback after the season that he's going to be, a potential round one guy, then I definitely don't doubt that, he's going to jump. I'm not sure that he's ready, but I did see some of the same things against Texas A&M this past weekend. with him stepping up into the pocket. And I thought that was encouraging because I'm not really sure that I saw that as consistently in the games that I watched early this season. But just he looked really comfortable. And I thought that was, encouraging overall. He's definitely a guy, definitely talented enough to be an NFL quarterback. It's just a matter of like stringing together consistency, not just game to game, but like snap to snap. And that's the thing that's been my takeaway really from watching him this year. I'll kind of get to, my guy that I've kind of circled this past weekend, Christian Gonzalez, corner from Oregon. A junior who transferred from Colorado last year, physical profile just off the charts. I mean, 6'2", 200 pounds. He was a Feldman's Freaks guy from The Athletic on the preseason list. And, they had him clocked at 23 miles per hour on the GPS, 42-inch vertical. And the speed really shows up on tape. I mean, he is an incredibly smooth mover. Oregon, one of the hottest teams in the country. I'm not really sure how Bo Nix is pulling all of this off. They're really on a roll, and they went into Colorado this past weekend, where he transferred from, and Gonzalez had, the game maybe of his career from what I've seen. 2 picks, one of them, which was almost a pick six. You just look at the tape. I watched the UCLA game, just really fluid hips, a smooth mover. And he's starting to find like the football more consistently. I remember when I watched him over the summer when he was at Colorado, that was something that I kind of had in my notes, like needs to find the ball, needs to locate the ball better in the air. And I think you're starting to see that, that first interception was a good example of that last weekend where he was able to turn and find the ball and, it was thrown right to him. And then the second one where he was kind of coming off that switch release, like we talked about before the show. And he made that nice break on the ball, caught the ball away from his frame. I've seen him try to do that a couple times, but that was, one of the few examples I've seen where he's actually caught the ball away from his frame, which isn't, it's a good bonus for a corner. Definitely something you like to see, a smooth transition out of his break, out of his pedal. He's a guy that, I think when we're looking for, Keely Ringo's kind of been that CB1 touted player really throughout the summer. But like when we're looking for other guys to leap into that round one conversation, I think for me, Gonzalez is very firmly in that discussion in terms of, which players we should be watching for to kind of make that rise.
Yeah, I fully agree with that on Christian Gonzalez, and, having that frame, that height and that athleticism is already enticing enough. But the film study to go with it, like you said, on the second play, just the ability to match the second receiver, come back off the switch release and intercept the ball. That's the type of stuff I would really like to see out of corners, and just how their film study goes into how they prepare, how consistently their ball skills show up.
Sure. Yeah, I was really interested in that. I kind of watched, we talked about it before the show, but I was watching like his post-game presser. He was trying to really downplay the significance of like going back to Colorado, like the visiting locker room type of thing, getting to see all of his old friends on his old team. But they asked him about how that second interception kind of came about. And he was talking about, just film study, how much work he puts into it. And then how, he knew that basically when they got in that stacked alignment, there was only so many different route combinations that they would run. So basically, he had a read on it like as it was happening in real time. And that's how you make those good breaks in zone coverage. And that's what's kind of interesting to me is there's some really encouraging reps in press. The kid can move with anybody. And that's really what you like in terms of like a press corner. When you look at the length and the speed and how he can, flip his hips and run, there's really not a lot of guys that are going to be able to, just be better athletes than he is. And that's definitely translatable. And it's nice to see, when guys are starting to take that leap, heading into the last part of the season, because, he's a guy that's probably going to declare early, and you want to kind of end the year, on a high note, playing your best ball. And I definitely think that Gonzalez is somebody that's, doing that right now. Let's see here. Let's talk about, the Steelers kind of threw us a bone, if you will, by trading Chase Claypool for a second round pick. Just because not just because it was a good trade, and in my opinion, I know you feel the same way. But it gives us more draft capital to kind of talk about some possibilities. It definitely generates a lot of interest in terms of what's going to transpire in the spring. But I feel like the two names that are kind of popping up the most on my timeline, prospect wise, Will Anderson, Jalen Carter. Obviously, the Steelers are struggling right now, 2-6. So they're going to be in that potential range to get both of those guys. So I wanted to definitely hit on those guys, get your thoughts on both of them as a player, and then kind of like who you value a little bit more. Let's start with Will Anderson. What's your overall takeaways from Anderson so far?
My overall takeaway is Anderson is very polished with his hands. He understands how to approach each snap with his pass rush plan. He very solid at generating power from his speed, and overall everything is really, from a technical standpoint, he's very sound, and I like how he's able to stack these. He's able to set the edge, and how he fits as a run support guy. Overall, he's had some missed tackles this year. I think he had upwards to like over double digit missed tackles this year, and it really showed up against LSU. They had, there were instances of him having a guy in the backfield and not being able to corral him. He might be a little shorter armed than, shorter wingspan than you're hoping for a guy like that. And one of the things with Will Anderson is he's a good athlete and he's a blue chip in terms of his technical ability. But I don't see I'm not going to say he doesn't have bent, because he definitely does. But I think he gets pushed up the arc a little too far at times, and there are some plays where I think he should just be able to turn that tight corner and be able to, get behind, get the strip sack. And I just didn't see that consistently enough from him. And that's not what you want to see in, like, if you're debating between him and Jalen Carter. Personally, for me, I'm leaning towards Carter, but we'll get into Carter a little later for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the kind of bend aspect for Anderson. I definitely think he can bend. Like, he's not a guy that I think is stiff, but I don't see that as being like a overwhelming strength for him. Like you mentioned, just the technical refinement, especially with the hand usage, it's incredible. I think he's, really for me, it starts with the get off. I mean, that's the number one thing that I look for in terms of like pass rushers, especially edge guys. You just don't, like, if you were to stack the top 20 edge rushers in the NFL, you'd probably get like 18 of those guys that have elite first steps. I mean, the get off portion of being an edge rusher is so important at the next level. And I definitely think Anderson has that. I also think with Anderson, what makes him unique is, for one, the lateral agility. Like, the dude can literally cover multiple gaps and run support. I mean, the way that he moves laterally is not what you typically get, I think, from an edge rusher. And also, like, he was incredibly productive as a sophomore, over 30 tackles for loss, like 17 and a half sacks, I think. There has been a little bit of a dip in production this year. Still incredibly productive. I mean, he's leading the SEC in tackles for loss. He's like top 5 in pressures, only 7 sacks. Like you said, he's missed some opportunities in the backfield this year that are a little bit concerning in terms of missed tackles. I also think that we need to be careful about what we're looking at when we look at those box score numbers in terms of production, because he's not a guy that is just lining up in a wide 9 and just rushing off the edge every play. Like, Bama is asking him to play like 3-tech, 4-eye, like with his hand in the dirt. I don't think that that's necessarily the greatest thing for him, because it's not what he's going to do at the next level. But I do think he does it pretty well. Like, there are some instances of him playing like 3-tech, taking on double teams and making the play in run support. Like, he's a really good run defender, partially because especially for his size. I mean, he's only about 240 pounds. He's a really good run defender for his size, and I think that it's definitely not the same in terms of like build or skill set as like Trayvon Walker, but that's what made Trayvon Walker such a high floor pick last year, was that he was an incredible run defender. And I think Anderson, while maybe not that like, elite run defender, but he's a really good run defender, and he's a much more refined pass rusher. I want to see him start to add more moves to his bag too. That's the one thing that I think I've been most curious about, because I wanted to see more of a pass rush plan coming into the season, because he's a really good athlete. He's really refined. I want to see what type of move, like he has a good set of like counters, but I want to see, like, I thought he should add like maybe a cross chop or something like that to kind of go with his repertoire, but we haven't really seen that kind of just yet. But, very good prospect. I think we might have gotten ahead of ourselves in terms of like labeling him as like generational. Like he's not Myles Garrett.
Yeah. No,
I think that's fair.
Yeah. I think I completely 100. I think we're 100% on the same page with Will Anderson. Like you mentioned, as a run defender, though, like he's not that big, but he holds up extremely well, especially along the interior when he's getting doubled and stuff like that. Like they use him as a 4-eye, like you mentioned, and I'm kind of getting flashbacks to how Charlotte used Alex Highsmith before they moved him into a more prominent wide 9 role. And, I think personally for me, I don't look at sack numbers. I don't look at the box scores with edge rushers. I look for disruption, because production is disruption. And when you're constantly just getting pressure in the backfield, you're constantly just making the quarterback feel uncomfortable, that's valuable. I prefer that over a guy with like 12 sacks who just capitalized 12 opportunities into sacks, but did nothing with the rest of the snaps.
Yeah, and I think just kind of the last thing on Anderson, like the amount of power, like he plays with great leverage, and I think that's something that he uses to his advantage really at all times, especially when they kick him inside because he knows he has to. But just the amount of power that dude can generate, like through his core, his lower body, is really impressive, especially for a guy like I said who's a little bit lighter. But let's talk about Jalen Carter too. Kind of. In my opinion, when we were, getting ready for the pod, I said that I think we've got 3 kind of blue chip prospects in this class, at least from what I've seen so far. And I think it's Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, and Bryce Young, at least in my opinion, as we stand here today. Carter is a really interesting kid. I'm really upset that he got hurt early in the season off of that really like dirty, in my opinion, play where he kind of got hit with that low block. Yeah. Because this was a guy that I really wanted to see more of this year. Georgia had 5 first-round defenders taken last year in the draft, and I really thought that every time I would go watch like Nakobe Dean or Jordan Davis or Devontae Wyatt, I really thought that Jalen Carter was the best player on the defense. Like it was unreal how much he was popping on tape without me even watching him. And just the blend of power and just twitch for a guy that is that size, like 300 pounds, like no one, like you don't want to compare people to Aaron Donald, but that first step that Aaron Donald has like off the ball, like Carter has some reps where like he's off the ball, I swear, before like the center's even like beginning to raise up. And it's impressive to see like that type of movement skills for a guy that size. He had a sack and 2 forced fumbles last week against Tennessee. That forced fumble in the end zone, he literally just bull rushes right through that right guard, just sends him right back in the quarterback's lap. I mean, his highs, I think, are as good as like any defensive lineman we've probably seen in like the last 4 or 5 years. That Kentucky game from last year is legitimately one of the best tapes that I saw all of last season, and he wasn't even draft eligible. Like I wasn't even watching him on a play-by-play basis, but he was just dominating that game up front. I mean, pretty special player in my opinion.
Yeah, no, Carter to me, like, he was the best player on a ridiculously talented Georgia team last year. Like, every time I was watching Georgia, I was just like, I gotta watch Jalen Carter because he's just destroying this. He's just destroying this double team right here. Like, the thing with Carter is I love how refined his hand usage is and just how good he is at generating consistent pressure when he is on the field. Carter, it's really weird. He has like almost like a taller build, but he's not as like he's very proportionate. He's not like super like Javon Hargrave where he's like super built in like the upper legs. He's just all around like built, and
He's just
he's a
massive.
yeah, he's that guy, and I love how you mentioned the sack against Tennessee. I really love how he just like defeats, like he starts with the bull rush, goes with a push pull, swims over, and then just gets right into Hendon Hooker's face. And Carter, just his ability to consistently like get off the ball very quickly. There are instances of when teams try to pull their guards, and he just ends up beating the puller to the spot, and then the play's completely dead at that point. And I just really love seeing that type of athleticism and that
You know,
type of ability to defeat blocks with your hands. He's, in my opinion, if there's a, I don't like the term generational, but if there's a generational player in this class, Carter's the one that
yeah.
I would say, and he's who I prefer over Will Anderson.
A little bit different in terms of because he's so massive and he's like thick and well built throughout. And so he's a little bit difficult to kind of compare to most defensive tackles. When I watch Carter, I see some of the same traits that make Kenny Clark so good. Like maybe not a 1-by-1 comparison, but like Kenny Clark's a guy in Green Bay, constantly disruptive, mainly due to power, has incredible bull rush, and first step quickness. Like he can get off the ball and just be incredibly disruptive in the middle. And, in terms of, what you're looking for in a top, 5, we'll call it, draft pick, Carter checks a lot of the boxes. Same thing with Will Anderson. If you're going to take a defender in that range instead of, taking a quarterback or, trading back to acquire more picks, like maybe in the Steelers case, you got to have an incredibly disruptive player up front. And I think both of those guys check those boxes. They just kind of do it in a little bit different ways. It's definitely something that's going to make for a good discussion kind of down the line. We're going to have a lot of time to talk about those guys, see how they finish the season. Hopefully Carter's healthy the rest of the way. Anderson, it's weird because I don't really know that he can do much more to help his draft stock. Because he's a guy too. And just one more thing on him. I almost feel like he's getting a little bit of what we did with, not me, but what we all in the draft space did with Kayvon Thibodeau last year.
Yeah.
Where it's like, he's been so great for so long that now it feels like we've just kind of grown bored of him. And that's what some of the takes I was seeing about Thibodeau, like doesn't like football, like not productive enough. And I'm like, dude, what are we doing? Like this kid's been a star since he stepped foot on college campus. But it's going to be a good discussion. The Steelers in particular, I think, we're probably headed, even though the schedule's, lightens up. I think they're going to be at least within striking distance of, those guys being attainable in the draft, which is going to be really exciting because I think if you plant them on a healthy Steelers defense, even right now, you're really excited about the potential there.
Yeah. And you don't have to, in particular from a team building aspect, this is just my opinion, but I think the team could really benefit from re-signing Highsmith and then taking Jalen Carter, because at some point Cam Hayward's going to retire.
Yeah.
And
we won't get into that aspect of it a ton, but Hayward is kind of like has slowed down a little bit this year in terms of like overall production. Some of that could be due to, Watt not really being, healthy all season, but, like you said, you can't fend off Father Time for like too long. So we'll see kind of how that goes the rest of the season. But before we get out of here, let's talk about what we're watching for this weekend. We got another good college football slate on the horizon. What are some things that you're watching for on Saturday?
So there's quite a few games, but main game in particular I'm looking at is going to be Washington and Oregon. Washington runs this really vertical offense, and they got some pretty good playmakers like Rome Odunze, a wide receiver. I'm very interested to see how he matches up with Christian Gonzalez of Oregon, and they've had some interesting play from their quarterback as well, Michael Penix, who I haven't really seen a ton of draft buzz on, and I think he's shown a lot as a vertical passer. I was a little disappointed with his performance against Oregon State. A lot of unevenness. Some instances of the commentators like talking about his arm and then immediately throwing a bad interception.
The old jinx.
And, yeah, it was just like I'm watching him for the first time live, and I'm just like, oh man, like I want to see how he looks against like a good team against Oregon. And in particular, I also want to see how Bo Nix has looked. I've watched him a few times. They tend to run a lot of play action, and he's been doing really well off that play action. Bo's going to create a lot of interesting discussions, and I'm not going to quite get into it here, but his renaissance in Oregon has been an awesome story to watch overall.
Yeah, I tweeted something. It was like a week or two ago, and it was about not getting sucked into the Bo Nix hype. But I mean, you can't deny that he hasn't played extremely well. Like since that Georgia game in particular, I mean, there's very few quarterbacks in the nation. I mean, it's definitely not more than 8 or 10 that have played better than he has. So, regardless, hats off to him. Can't be a hater, even though if I'm still not completely buying into the hype. My thing is I'm really excited to see this Maryland Penn State game. Maybe not necessarily like a matchup in terms of like lining across from each other, but I'm interested to watch Olu Fashanu and Jalen Duncan. Duncan was a guy that we kind of knew about coming into the year. Really massive frame. He's like 6'6", 320, I think. Really good mover for his size. Just want to see more consistency on a snap-to-snap basis and cut down on the penalties. Those were the two things really that I wanted to see like coming into this season. I'm not really sure that he's done that in the games that I've watched. I don't have the numbers on me, but it just seems like when I've watched, there are some really encouraging reps, especially in pass pro. And then there's some reps where I'm like, I don't know if this is a guy that we should be talking about in like, the top 15, top 20.
Yeah.
But a really talented guy for sure. Maryland left tackle. And then probably, I don't know, I would think that he's the biggest riser out of anyone in college football this season. It's been Olu Fashanu from Penn State. Really can't think of anyone else that has come from basically nowhere. He only had one start last year when Rasheed Walker missed the last game of the season. Fashanu stepped in at left tackle, played really well. Massive frame, 6'6", 320. You love the length. The kid's only 19 years old. That's what's crazy about what he's doing right now, especially in pass protection. I think he's only allowed PFF said that he had only allowed 7 pressures on the season so far, 0 sacks across 300 pass blocking snaps. That to me is, that type of production that he's giving you in pass pro. He just looks so comfortable. And Penn State, they leave him out there on an island a lot. And, it's not always easy. I think this was something that I watched when studying Walker last year. It's not always easy to block for Sean Clifford because he's
no, it is not.
Very scatterbrained in the pocket. Like you talk about, I mean, he's like the typical guy where at least for a college quarterback, he's athletic enough, he's mobile enough to get himself out of trouble, but he's going to run himself into trouble almost as much as, anything else. So, I've been really impressed with what I've seen from him in pass pro. He was a guy that I highlighted for the site 2 weekends ago when they played Ohio State. he had that matchup against Zach Harrison. Ohio State, they've always got, incredibly gifted physically edge rushers, and he didn't even allow a pressure, I don't think, in that game for what I saw. So, the body of work that he's putting together as a 19-year-old, we're still kind of looking for that top tier elite left tackle prospect in this class, in my opinion. Skoronski's kind of been the guy that we've known about for a long time, but there's some arm length concerns there where I think a lot of teams are probably going to want to push him to guard. Even I think he has shorter arms than the guy like Rashawn Slater, who I think has definitely proven that those concerns were stupid already with the Chargers before he got hurt. But we're still kind of looking for who that guy is going to be for the left tackle position. I think Fashanu has as good of a chance as anybody to kind of like secure that either OT1 or maybe slide himself maybe into like top 10, top 15 type discussions as we move forward.
I definitely agree with that. The game against Ohio State, I just barely one of the things was an offensive tackle, an offensive lineman. If you can barely notice a guy throughout the game, that's a great sign. And just seeing that, and of course there across the other side, I forget the guy's name, but 44 for Ohio State, he was having a day against whoever he was going up against. I'm gonna leave this a little short, but Duncan, I only have exposure to him in the summer scouting, and what I remember was game against Boye Mafe was where he really caught my eye. But you said he's been pretty uneven to start, to just consistency wise, I would say. So you've got to look for more consistency in tackle, and especially the guy with his traits.
Yeah, and he's a good mover for his size, but it always kind of perplexes me a little bit when guys do have good feet at left tackle, but they get beat around the edge a lot. And that to me is not great because, at the NFL level, everybody that's playing edge on a snap basis can win the corner. And if you're going to be thrown into the fire, especially early on, as a first round pick at tackle, you got to be able to prepare for that. I'm just not sure that I see that consistency with him to where I'm comfortable putting him out there on an island. But, a good player, a good prospect. I'm just not I want to see more before I really put him in, that first half of the first round kind of discussion. In terms of Fashanu too, I think what makes him incredibly unique is the core strength that he has. That ability to stop a bull rush, transition quickly to his anchor, kind of just disrupt pass rushers, kind of stonewall them at the point of attack is really impressive to me, especially for a kid that he's only 19 years old. So not really physically, kind of a finished product, I don't think. So that's incredibly impressive for me. I think that everything I've seen from him just means that he's going to, rise and rise and rise throughout the process. We won't get into this matchup a ton, but, I am excited to watch. The big game of the weekend is kind of Bama. They play Ole Miss at 3:30. That's going to be another fun one to watch. Bama's got a bazillion prospects every year. The two guys that have impressed me the most, maybe other than the, obvious Bryce Young, Will Anderson guys, has been Jahmyr Gibbs. Bama, we talked about it before the show. Bama doesn't have the weaponry they've had in the past, 10 years under Nick Saban. But Jahmyr Gibbs has been everything they've hoped for and more than they could have ever dreamed, in my opinion. There are shades. I know the comp has been thrown around, but there are really some shades of Alvin Kamara to me. Not just how they look with the arm tape on the arms, but the kid's incredibly gifted as a receiver. He made a play for Young last week that really stuck out to me when, Bryce, he does this typical standing in the pocket, just kind of bouncing around, and then he takes off. Mm-hmm. And what I love about Young is when he moves out of the pocket, his eyes are downfield. Sometimes you get frustrated because you're dude, just take off and get 10 yards. You're fast enough, just go get it. But he wants to keep his eyes down the field. And Gibbs made a play for him last week where he was I think running an out breaking route maybe like an option route or something like that. And Young kind of started rolling to his right. He comes back to the middle of the field to like find this like open space in the defense and catches a ball, moves the chains on third down. Gibbs is just a guy to me that like he's got 3 down potential from really the jump because he is going to eat linebackers alive on like choice routes, angle routes. They split him out wide. He's just been a guy that I've really enjoyed watching. And then just on a lighter note, I've really kind of grown to appreciate Brian Branch. He's kind of playing that money, position that Minkah Fitzpatrick played for Saban. He had some really interesting reps against Keyshawn Boutte